is something that I love almost as much as sharks. It's maps. Love maps. Why? Well, one of the things that I see with the tube map here, the underground map, is that it shows all the connections, the ways of travel that everybody has in London if you're using the public transport system. And when you look at it, it's a beautiful piece of art that shows these corridors of movement between nodes that represent your critical habitats, where you live, your safe homes, your restaurants, hospitals, your work, schools, maybe bars where you find your mates, etc. And so this map I've kind of taken to heart, and I see maps everywhere. I live in Panama, and I started looking at what's my map in Panama City, and I realized it's actually a pretty reduced map. It's pretty much nothing compared to the tube map. Home to food, a couple of restaurants. Notice that there's a larger arrow for one of the restaurants. That's Thai, FYI. And so I've been loving maps for a long time, and I kind of map out worlds and I map out what animals do. And this love of maps has actually came into being when I first started working with whale sharks. I say, biggest fish in the sea, go big or go home, right? Okay, so start big. Biggest fish in the sea in Belize. And what I thought was quite interesting is that a lot of fishers I was working with on fish spawning aggregations at the time had key questions of, well, are they here the whole time in Belize? The entire year? Do they go somewhere else? Or more, do they come back the following year? And that formed the basis for the map that you see in the right-hand corner, which was co-created with a lot of tagging that I did with the traditional fishers in Belize, and then subsequently in Honduras and Mexico and more. And what you see from here is that that Western Caribbean area between Honduras, Belize, and Mexico, where there are these three nodes, 3 different restaurants with 3 food types for whale sharks, is clearly very important to these species. And once we got actually several of these nodes protected and getting everybody excited about sharks, I mean, they are the ambassadors of sharks. I tend to not call them toothy sharks, so they are adopted readily by a lot of people. People love to swim with them. It was kind of the ambassador, the gate opener for sharks in that region. And it created jobs, and conservation created jobs. And so many of the fishers I was working with then said, well, what about other species in this area? What about finfish? What about turtles? What about other sharks? Because we're seeing declines across the board. And we're really worried because, well, we eat some of these species, and then we also know that people come here to see them. Could we possibly look into what's happening with their populations? Is this Mesoamerican reef as important for these other species? And if they are, well, brilliant. Because then what you're doing is you're getting great bang for the pound in the Western Caribbean, because you're then able to demonstrate maybe some conservation action and solutions for multiple species. Because, as everybody said, conservation funding is indeed tight. So species like the second largest grouper in the world, the Goliath grouper, it only matures when it's 6, 7 years old, much later than your cat or dog, and it can live for decades. Huge draw for tourism. Also, people absolutely love the head for soup. How do you balance? How do you balance that, right? And turtles, thank goodness, turtles are protected in the Western Caribbean. But one thing that we knew is that female turtles were using some of the areas of the Western Caribbean. We were starting to map out some of their some of their maps, I guess, but we had no idea what was going on with the male turtles. And why should we even care about male turtles? Well, there's an active trade in their penises in certain parts of the world, so the poor things, they have a hard time. But there's another reason too, because in nests, the sex of turtles is determined by temperature. And the higher the temperature, the more females you have. So what's going to happen to the future of turtles in a warming world? And we really wanted to know, how do they move in relation to females in this entire area? And let me tell you, trying to catch in water, and by the way, the only way you can get them is if you catch them in water. They weigh between, these big adult males, 300 and 350 pounds. They've been around since Churchill's been walking the corridors of Westminster. And what we found was amazing. So this is just some of the preliminary information in the last year and a half or so. And that is, you see tagged turtles on the left-hand side. We see them foraging certain times of year, all the way up until about February. And then one of the turtles that was in the middle of Belize, where you see the knife and fork, I think that's a wonderful icon for the restaurant, takes off in March 2023. Hugely directed movement, and it crosses boundaries. As my colleagues have said, they know no boundaries. How incredibly inconsiderate of them. Makes our conservation work just a little bit more challenging. And they go up north. And what is up there? Well, through collaborations with my Mexican turtle specialists, they said, oh my God, that's a major female loggerhead nesting beach. And so what we construe is that that is where sexy time for turtles happens. And not all of them have the same pattern. You've got some that might be eating in Honduras, and then they go for sexy time in Belize. And then what happens is after 1 or 2 months, they come back. So we're starting to build up this map of turtles, not just female, but male. And how do we mitigate threats from them in this area? But let's get back to sharks. I work with all of these species, and my team works with all of these species primarily because they are long-lived. They're late maturing, and they, generally speaking, are very unproductive. There are very few young that actually reach maturity, if any, sometimes. But in the case of sharks, trying to figure out that map of what sharks need, where are sharks going, how can we best protect them in their key habitats, pupping, feeding, mating, and more. And are these habitats being strung together by these corridors that they repeatedly use over their lifespan? Caribbean reefs, we found out after several years, Caribbean reefs will eat, mate, and pup in similar areas and same areas. But when they become teenagers, they leave the home, or they leave the home habitat. Does this sound familiar? So I have a teenager, a 17-year-old. He's about to do what a Caribbean reef shark does around the same age. So these guys will take off to another area, which is brilliant for genetic mixing, etc., but you will see some of them come back to some of those foraging and pupping habitats. And through the course of this work in establishing these maps, we also make new discoveries. We had no idea that there's a key habitat, pupping habitats for tiger sharks. Why would we care about tiger sharks or even Caribbean reefs in this particular region? Because people want to see sharks. They really do. It's remarkable how much there's been a change of attitudes towards them. People will go long distances to actually swim and dive with them, and top of that list of sharks that they want to see, if it's not whale sharks, it'll be tiger sharks and hammerheads. So being able to find out where these guys usually are is part of the driver underpinning a sector that is soon going to be worth $790 million globally. And this is a great alternative for a lot of coastal communities and fishers who would normally rely on catching and filleting them. I mentioned bull sharks. This is a bull shark. It's a big female bull shark. And one of the things that we are trying to elucidate with Whitley Fund for Nature Continuation Money is, how are they using this corridor in the Western Caribbean? Are they forming, or are they part of this, what seems to be a shark superhighway between Belize and Mexico? They come to a certain place called Playa del Carmen every time between November and January. They're heavily pregnant and more, and then they leave. But where do they go to? We know they get fished. So where do they get fished? Where do they pup? How can we best protect this species that is so emblematic for the Mexican Quintana Roo coast, and then be able to also provide such huge offset with the bull shark tourism? And another key thing that I'm really keen on doing is, how do we decentralize this tourism? As we learn about these sharks, we create these maps. How can we work with more communities, with the traditional fishers who've now learned how to handle them and keep them alive? How do we decentralize the tourism and make sure more of this money gets into many, many more hands? And that changes attitudes towards the sharks. And I just want to show you this very quickly, because it's not just movement from point A to point B between key habitats, it's also intrinsic movement and how these animals are adapting evolutionarily, but also sometimes to the changing climate. This is a great hammerhead. We had put on a triaxial accelerometer tags on great hammerheads. I have some very, very smart colleagues who were able to model out their movements. And what this short video showed is it's not tilted. That hammerhead was actually swimming on its side. Why would it do that? Because we found out of putting little hammerheads and flumes and such, and analyzing data from these tags that look like phones that we put on the fins, we realized they were saving 10% of their energy by swimming on their sides. What other discoveries are we going to make? And how is this going to build up the resilience of these species, especially in seascapes that are getting hotter? It'll be harder for them to find prey. As the oceans become more acidic and hotter, it becomes harder to find prey. And if you're prey, it becomes harder to evade your predator. So we're really looking forward to, through the course of discovering this shark superhighway corridor, details how these same animals are also shifting their swimming behaviors. What does success look like? I love that slide from Munir. Success looks like many sharks in the sea. Every time you go swimming, you are swimming with sharks that are not being fed. This, to me, is success. This is an underwater camera with bait on the end of it, and we used to see maybe 1 or 2 sharks. Now we are seeing 5, 6, 7 or more sharks. This begs the question, as we see increases in numbers in some of these key areas where we've been successful in promoting shark policies, again, with our fisher cohorts, with decision makers. It's been really a group work over the last 10 to 15 years. But are we ready for more sharks? That's the question. Every time I come across people, they say, I love sharks, but how much do you love sharks? And this is the thing. So we're always struggling. Sharks are food. I like to say they're friends. But sharks are food for many. They are increasing in numbers. And so if we are really successful in conservation, it will mean more sharks in the sea. And we need to get ready for that. And part of our job is to get everybody ready for that. And that's another reason why we love to work with the fishing community, because they've learned how to handle them. They learned that they're not just going to gnash at them. And they've learned that if they swim underwater, they're not going to be coming for them. And it's really so huge changes of attitudes and perceptions. This is also what success looks like. This is Ivan Torres, a fisherman from northern Belize who is releasing a Caribbean reef that he just tagged. So I've trained hundreds of fishers, local students, NGO biologists, shifting the ownership of science over to folks so that they feel empowered to be able to conduct this science. This is really, really key and critical. And as a result of this, Ivan is tremendous. He does everything he can to make sure those sharks are in absolutely wonderful shape. He now knows how to do the surgeries for the implantation of tags and the satellite tags and so much more. And now his map, which was very constricted, we all think about what our life maps are. As we discover the maps of sharks, his map too has gotten much bigger because he is moving with the sharks and now training hosts of other fishers, not just in Belize and Mexico. In fact, he just got back a week ago from training a cohort of Mexican fishers, but Panama and further afield. Who better to learn from? Me? Maybe not. Ivan? Definitely. Because other fishers will understand and will empathize with what he's had to go through to have now more of a conservation lens. So I would ask you, as we wrap up here, we've seen, or we're discovering what these shark maps are. I can't wait to keep you apprised of how this shark superhighway goes, what new discoveries we make, and more. And I would ask you, what kind of a map do you have? What kind of a map are you creating? And how will you integrate into that map considerations for wildlife, be they marine, riverine, aerial, forest, ecosystems, and more. So make sure when you are building your map that you have space to be able to integrate all of this incredible wildlife, these incredible sites that everybody's talked about, leopards in Sri Lanka and more. And I would invite you then to think very carefully, what does your map look like? And give some consideration for these wildlife and continue to support all the incredible work that Whitley Fund for Nature and all of the Whitley winners have provided over the last 30 years. Thank you.